Salve omnes, and welcome to a video on the relative pronoun, that is quae, quod. First of all, a bit of English to make sure everyone knows what we're talking about. Pronouns are words that take the place of a noun, hints in the word. There's lots and lots of different types of pronoun, personal pronouns, possessive pronouns, reflexive pronouns, demonstrative pronouns, indefinite pronouns, and interrogative pronouns. I'm going to mention these ones in particular because you can tell the difference between an interrogative pronoun, who, what, which, etc., by looking at basically, is there a question mark? I'm going to come back to that little logic a bit later on. So, relative pronoun in English, this is a somewhat simple version. We know that pronouns are words that take the place of nouns. Relative pronouns is something that relates to something in the previous sentence or the main clause, and it always introduces a subordinate clause known as a relative clause. So in English we're seeing examples like who, whom, whose, which. Some examples. So the woman who was sensible wanted a dog. So we can see that this bit here, this is our relative clause, and who is our relative pronoun. The woman adopted a rescue dog whose name was Fido. The woman gave her dog dinner, which was pizza, so that which refers to the dinner. The dog whom everybody petted was now very happy, so we can see that it relates to the word usually just before it in English. Don't feed your dogs pizza. There is a slightly more complicated version, which basically explains why I'm going to use whom. I'm just going to leave you to read that if you want. So, how does the relative pronoun work in Latin then? Well, we can see up here I've given us a chart, which, spoilers, isn't the full chart, but if you're in year 8 and 9, it probably is the full chart for you. We can see that in the chart we've got a lot of endings on a quo stem, which is basically the root form of the word quae, quod, or the relative pronoun. We can see that we've got to worry about case, we've got to worry about number, which is singular plural, and we've got to worry about gender. If we look in the first sentence, we have a sentence, servus qui in horto laborat est litus. If we imagine that qui just means who, now it actually comes up twice in the table. It could be singular, could be plural, but conveniently both of them are nominative masculine, so for now we're just going to ignore it and say that it says who. The slave, the servus, who in horto, in the garden, laborat, is working, est litus, is happy. That actually sounds quite reasonable if we just read more or less left to right. The slave, who is working in the garden, is happy. You'll notice that while there isn't commas in Latin, I have put them in the English. You can add in commas when you are trying to translate a Latin sentence, and it's often quite a good idea because it helps you break up what is the subclause and what is the main clause. If we apply that logic to the second sentence, we can see ancillae quae in culina laborat canem facit. Where would we put the commas? Well, we can probably put one before the quae because that seems kind of logical, as we know it introduces a subclause. Where's the second one go? Well, in general, Latin sentences end with a verb, but not only sentences, clauses end with a verb. So if we look at the verbs, we can see that laborat is obviously a verb, and as is facit. Facit is the end of the whole sentence. So if we just put a line after laborat to say that's where our comma is going to be, and then let's see how this goes. Quae, as we can see here, probably refers to our slave girl. If we look in our table, it comes up quite often, but what does it mean? Well, let's just say for the sake of argument, it still means who. We're still going to try this really simple. The slave girl, the ancillae, quae in culina, in the kitchen, is working, is making dinner. You can see that I've already shown you the translation there. Now, notice here that unlike the first sentence, the main sentence, ancilla canem facit, the slave girl is making dinner, is much more of a sort of significant sentence, and you'd get very confused if you tried to end up with a sentence of something like the slave girl is making dinner in the kitchen and is working, or something like that. No. We want to go for subclauses, so use commas, break it off. Unfortunately, you can't always use commas. If you look in the last sentence here, we can probably put a sentence before the quod, but we can't really put one after the est, because then we just have a sentence something like who is, which doesn't really make sense. As it happens, we actually have to put it after the urbe, because words like sum can quite often go different places in the sentence. So you can't always use the rule of where is the verb, but it's usually a good start. So if we're looking at the sentence, we have forum quod. Well, where does quod come up? Quod comes up twice, nominative and accusative, both of them neuter. It's a thing, we're just going to put which. Nice. The forum, which est in urbe, is in the city, est magnum is big. again, very simple. The forum which is in the city is big. So we can see that the English commas and the sort of the breaks in Latin make sense. So what is the rule then when we're looking at this? Well, forum is neuter, as is quod. Ancilla is feminine, as is quae. Servus is masculine, as is quae. So we can take a wild guess that we're going to have to match gender with whatever we are describing. Now, you probably can't quite see from this, but we also have to match the number. You can kind of do it the last one reasonably. Forum is clearly singular, as is quod. It can't be forum quae, which could be plural over here, or which could be feminine. No. It needs to match the number and the gender. But what about case? Well, let's have two different sentences here which have got slight variations on each other. And we can see if we look at this, we go to the service sentence on the left, we have quae versus quem. What is the difference between what's going on here? Well, in the first sentence, the one we've seen, quae is going to have to be nominative. It's probably going to be singular and masculine because there's only one slave. Quem is here in the accusative. So if you imagine what that means is, if we wrote out that sentence separately, it'd be something like servum, because it's just accusative singular. The slave whom the master is punishing is not happy. So this subclause here almost works like it's its own sentence. Not quite, because it is still referring to the main sentence, but it nearly works like it's its own sentence. We have a nominative, dominus, we have a verb, punit, and we have an accusative that's having the verb done to it, quem. Notice that slave is masculine. It is masculine, but it's also nominative. The slave is not happy. He is being something. He is nominative. But the quem is accusative. Something's happening to him. If we look across on the right, you can see the same sort of thing going on. We have quae in the first sentence, but quam in the second sentence, which again follows the same logic. Quae is nominative, quam is accusative. We can see that the dominus is amatting quam, the accusative version of the relative pronoun, which is why I've used the word whom. The slave girl, whom the master loves, is making dinner. Notice she's still doing the verb, even though in the subclause she's accusative. It doesn't matter, because in the main clause, which is always a sentence you translate first, you can see that she's nominative. So the rule basically is the relative pronoun takes the case of whatever job it is doing in the subclause. If it's doing something, nominative. If it's having something done to it, it is accusative. Sometimes it's the same as the actual as the version that it refers to, that is to say, the noun that it refers to, but often it's not. So let's look at some more examples. This would be a good opportunity if you want to do it by yourself to pause. So 3, 2, 1. The nuntii, so we're thinking, okay, nuntii quae. So quae up here, it's probably going to be nominative plural because the nuntii are probably nominative plural because they're the first thing in the sentence. The messengers, who, it's nominative, so we know it's going to be who were portabanting multas epistulas, many letters arrived at the city. So we can see here we have a nominative plural, and that is helpfully describing what's going on. If we look at the second sentence, however, we can see quas. Quas is over here, so it's got the accusative, which tells us that the letters are not doing anything in our little subclause. So the epistulae, the letters, they erant breves. That's the main sentence. The letters were short. What kind of letters? The letters quas nuntii portabant, the letters which the messengers were carrying, were short. Now I've said which there because letters are a thing in English. Latin, they are feminine. They're not neuter, they're feminine, so they get feminine type endings. You don't, however, have to call the letters like they're a person. You don't have to say the letters whom the messengers were carrying. Then they're not living things. So just use the correct English. Don't worry about it too much. Third sentence. The milites in bello quod erat dirum pugnabant. Okay, well, if we're looking at the sentence, we can see that quod, again, this comes up twice, so it could be nominative, could be accusative. Okay, we'll have to think about both. The soldiers in bello pugnabant. Well, that's pretty simple. The soldiers were fighting in the war. Quod erat dirum, which erat was dirum dire. oh, that makes perfect sense then, which was dreadful. So actually, as it turns out, it must have been nominative, but it could have been accusative. We just worked out it was nominative first time, and that was fine. Third sentence down, fourth sentence even, that's how numbers work. The pueri vident gladios. The boys saw swords. What type of swords? Quos. We can see that's definitely accusative. We know something's happened to the swords. So the swords, quos, which the milites reliquerant, the soldiers left. So we can see in this sentence, swords are accusative. And conveniently enough, they're accusative both in the main clause and in the subclause. So sometimes the cases match. Last sentence, the senex, he habebat multa consilia. Now, be careful with that multa consilia. Someone who's not really paying attention might think that that's feminine singular, like puella, but someone who's paying attention would think, hold on, I know that consilium goes like bellum, so it must be nominative or vocative or accusative. Plural, first word in the sentence, senex, is almost certainly going to be nominative, so clearly consilia has got to be accusative plural. So, the senex had many plans. What type of plans? Well, quae. Quae could, of course, come up several times. So we could have it in any of these. Let's imagine that it means which, because it's referring to plans. So quae erant stulta, which were stupid. Oh, there we go. We can see that just like in the quod erat dirum, quae erat stulta, it's fairly obvious to translate, just going left to right. However, you might not be doing Year 8 and 9 Latin, you might well be doing GCSE Latin, in which case you need to know the full chart. The relative pronoun, incidentally you can kind of see where that word comes from, it is relatus, brought back to something in the previous sentence, or relates to. So the full chart, as we can see there, A does not have a vocative. Most pronouns don't have a vocative. You can also notice that I've underlined where there are really strong similarities to first and second declension endings, which can help you to learn them, particularly for the plural, not so much for the singular. The singular is a little bit odd. There is a logic, it's kind of a halfway mix between third declension endings like rex and second declension endings like servus and first declension endings like quella. So there is a bit of a logic, but it's easier just to learn it as its own thing. And you really do need to learn it as its own thing. It comes up all the time. It's really, really important, and you absolutely will see it at GCSE. I would suggest, in all honesty, the easiest way to do it is by chanting. Because if you can get the chant down, you'll just memorize it. Because if you ever see it, you may need to go through the full thing in your head, but that only takes a few seconds, and then you will know for a fact what ending it is. It's also really helpful in that quae quod has endings that are very similar to other big pronouns that we need to know, like ille and hic and is, etc. So it's very helpful if you learn all of these endings. So, going through it. Quae quod, quem quam quod, cuius cuius cuius, qui, quo qua quo, qui quae, quos quae, quorum quorum, quibus quibus quibus, quibus quibus quibus. You'll have noticed in there that, bizarrely enough, the genitive and dative singular go cu rather than qu. It's just a thing. You'll also notice that I go left to right here rather than vertically. It's slightly easier, at least in my opinion, to learn pronouns going left to right because you can sort of see the similarities. For example, the genitive and dative singular are identical across the genders, so you've slightly less to learn. One more time fast. Quae quod, quem quod, cuius qui, quo qua quo, qui quos quae, quorum quorum, quibus quibus. At GCSE myself, I learned how to do the whole thing at ridiculous speeds. I would recommend that you do it because you will always know it if you learn it that way. So, how do these other cases actually work in Latin then? Well, we can see some examples. I'm going to go through them. If you want to have a go by yourself, this would be a convenient opportunity to pause. So, the centre, cuius filia. Well, we can see cuius only comes up in the genitive singular. If it's genitive, we can instantly translate it as whose. It's a good trick, that. So the centre, whose filia, whose daughter, erat pulcherrima, was very pretty. He emit an equum. He bought or buys a horse. Fairly simple to do that as long as you get that cuius being whose. Next sentence, slightly more complicated. We can see that quae in there, nice and simple, has to be dative. So we know it's going to be to or for whom, because that's the only thing it could be. That makes life easier. However, this is where someone who's not really paying attention might well come a cropper. They might well look at this sentence, get a little bit confused about how the whole thing is going, and try and go for like the young man's father or something like this, just because those words are next to each other. No, no, no. What you want to do, as the commas are there to help you, and even if they're not, you can add them in, you want to kind of cordon off this little subclause. Don't worry about it. We'll come back to it in a minute. If you ignore that, the sentence is very simple. Pater non amat juvenem. That my father, or the father, doesn't like the young man. What kind of young man? The young man cui donum dedit, to whom I dedi a donum, I gave a gift. If you comma off sentences, your life will be easier. Next one down. Cum quo. Well, actually, this one's very convenient. Quo, we can see, only comes up in the ablative singular. So we know it's usually going to be with whom, by whom, from whom. There's a lot of different meanings of the ablative. But, very conveniently, we have the preposition cum in front of it, telling us that it means with. So instantly, we know this is going to have to mean with whom. The prisoner, with whom, librum scribo, I am writing a book, in insula, on the island, manet, is staying or is remaining. If there's a preposition, it will go, exactly as it would in the English, directly before the relative pronoun, with whom. Full sentence down is a little bit trickier. Now here's a really nasty trick in particular. We can see quae at the start, and we know that quae means who. And you might well be trying to force in some relative pronoun here, but this one actually isn't a relative pronoun. If we look right towards the end, we can see that this sentence actually ends at a question mark. This is actually the interrogative pronoun. In some of the time, it looks identical to the relative, and indeed in English they are the same. Who could be giving you more information about something, or could be a question. So in this case, let's just roll it as being nominative plural. If we think of that, then this sentence actually becomes a lot easier. If we know that quae is nominative plural, who, then we've got to go all the way to the end to find our verb, audiverent. Who heard? Who heard the what? The clamores puerorum, the shouts of the boys. Okay, fine. So we've done the main sentence first, often very sensible. Now we need to think about this subclause. Well, quorum only comes up the once. We know instantly it's got to be genitive, and therefore that it's got to be whose. Who heard the shouts of the boys, whose amicus friend erat in periculo, was in danger. As soon as you sort of bracket stuff off and deal with the main sentence first, your life will generally get easier. Next sentence down, another classic one for someone who's not really paying attention to make stupid errors on. We can see in quibus. Well, quibus comes up a lot of different times. Could be dative or could be ablative, or plural by necessity though. However, again, there is a preposition in front of it, so we know that it's going to be in whom or in which, as it is in this particular instance. Again though, what we'll do first, we'll bracket off that bit and we'll think about the main sentence. The rex aedificavit templa reginae. Well, templum is the basic form of that word, goes like bellum, so templa has to be plural. The king built temples, accusative plural, makes sense here. Reginae could be of the queen, but it's far more likely, just by the order of this sentence, to be for the queen. But it could be of, admittedly, that would actually work in the sentence. If we look in the bit in the middle here, in our relative clause, in quibus, in which the milites cellant, the soldiers, are hiding. So again, the main trick here is always bracket off subclauses and deal with the sentence. This will come in particularly useful if you look at our last sentence here. We can see that actually, I've done a very mean thing, there are two relative clauses, one there in black and one there in red. And if you bracket off those bits, the sentence actually gets a lot easier. Canes vicerunt insulam. If you know what vicerunt means, which you should do because it's on the GCSE vocab list, we will have the dogs conquered the island. That's the main sentence. After that, all we need to do is start adding in the extra information. So what kind of dogs? Well, the dog's quos. Well, quos we know must be accusative, so we know that it's dogs whom omnes amant, whom everybody loves or likes. What do? They conquered the island. What kind of island? It's the island in quae. Well, quae only comes up once, and it must be adverb, and there's that in front of it again, making our life easier, so we know it's in which. The files, actually to be fair, that one isn't on the GCSE vocab list. Files means cats. We get words like felines from it. So, the island in which the cat's habitant, in which the cats live, or on which the cats live. And you can see on the right there a dramatisation of the dogs conquering said island, colorized. So, relative pronoun as a summary. The relative pronoun relates to something in the previous sentence or clause or the main clause itself. If you're discussing a person, you translate it as either who, whose, whom, or if you're discussing a thing, you're going to use whose or which. You need to pay attention to the case of the relative pronoun. Relative pronouns always introduce relative clauses, which are subordinate clauses which are used to give additional information about something, almost always a noun. The relative pronoun takes on the number and gender of that noun that it's giving you more information about, but the case of the relative pronoun is just whatever case it would naturally have in the subclause. If it's doing something in the subclause, it's nominative. If it's having something done to it, it's accusative. You must make sure that you check that case because it's often not the same as the main noun that it is referring to. And you can really get very confused if you don't check the case. When you are translating, a good trick is to always bracket off that subordinate clause, translate the main sentence, and know that you can come back to it later. Right, that's it. Hope that helps. Thank you very much.